What's happening, YouTubers, and thank you for coming back to the channel. And in this episode I will be talking to you about my ultimate lens lineup that I currently use. I done one of these lens lineups a couple of years ago, but my choice of lenses has changed since then. So I'm just going to go through what my main uses of each lens is, and there's 10, although there's only 9 shown here because one's currently on the X-T2 recording, but I will include that, of course. So let's get cracking, and I'm going to start off with the 50-140. So this I currently use for mainly events, so weddings and christenings. I always shoot it at a 2.8. I find that I do get nice compression with the lens. I wish it was more of a kind of an f2 style lens, so we got a little bit more depth of field. It's still not, in my opinion, as good as a Canon 70-200 2.8, but it is a good lens. Image stabilization is really good on this, and yeah, it's the kind of zoom that you really need, and the 50-140 really has to be in your bag. So that is the 50-140. The next lens is the 56mm 1.2, and this is used for me purely in a professional sense, where it is just used for wedding work, christenings. This is really good for christenings because in the churches they tend to be really dark and only really natural light coming in. So at 1.2 I can keep my ISO down and shoot around the sort of like 400-800, and I don't ever use this for anything else other than in a professional capacity. It's a beautiful lens, gives you nice compression, stunning depth of field and bokeh, and if you're a working professional or you just want some, you want a really nice lens, take pictures of your kids, stuff like that, as long as they stay still, because it's not the fastest lens to focus, I would highly recommend the f1.2 56mm, and I will attach a link to a previous video that I've done a review on this lens. Next we have the 10-24. And I would say this is one of my most used lenses. I have used it for street photography. I use this for more or less all of my landscape shots. I use it in a professional capacity for weddings and christenings, and I would be lost without this lens. I was considering getting the 8-16mm, but the whole fact that you cannot put an ND filter on the front because it has like a bulbous element totally swung me away from that, because I use ND filters all the time. So for the moment the 10-24 is my landscape lens, or one of. This is a brilliant lens. It is optically stabilized. Not that I feel you really need it on such a wide focal length, but even if you want to use this as a personal style lens for landscapes and stuff, or professional, in my opinion, I think this is the one to go over and above the 18-16mm. If you can afford both, get the 8-16mm to go along with this for things like wedding work or christenings, because in churches that 2.8 aperture obviously will help you out with an extra stop of light. I will also add a link to my review on the 10-24 in this video also. My next lens is a new lens. It's my latest lens, the 16mm 1.4, and I love this lens. This is an absolute must, again, if you're using it in a professional capacity, purely because at 1.4, again, you can gather enough light to keep your ISO down when you're, again, in dark environments. This almost doubles up as a macro lens. You can get in so close to your subject. It's sharp, and I mean really sharp. Gives you beautiful background blur, lovely depth of field, nice bokeh, and it gives you a really unique look when you are in really close with a wide focal length. I have also used this for street photography and just kind of general going out and about with the family, and I think this is probably one of my top 3 favourite lenses. And I haven't reviewed this lens yet, but when I do, I'll put a link in the video. But yeah, this is a must-have lens. I mean, I love the way you can manual focus. It's got a little clutch thing where you can pull it down, you can manual focus. Stunning lens, and again, I would highly recommend this lens. So slightly different this time. This is the Mitacon Speedmaster 0.95. This is the version 2 lens. This I reviewed a few months ago, and I was astounded by the sharpness of this lens. If I remember, I compared this to the 35mm f2 from Fuji, as they're both 35mm or 50mm equivalents in full frame terms, and this hands down is sharper than the Fuji lens, even with a manual focus, which is no big deal because you can do focus peaking. And again, the look you get with a 0.95, in my personal opinion, is the same as a full frame 1.4, so you can get that really nice depth of field with an APS-C camera. Not an expensive lens. It doesn't come with this square hood or this metal cap. In fact, it doesn't come with a hood, so you'd have to purchase those separately. But for a lens which is under, I think I picked this up for about £400 or 380, I can't remember, it was a while back. This is a fun lens, it's a beautiful lens, and I would highly recommend purchasing this lens if you want to have some real good subject separation in street photography, detail shots on weddings or christenings. This is perfect. You can get in really close, and the depth of field and the bokeh is simply beautiful. So that's a Speedmaster Mitacon 0.95 35mm. Next, I have an old favourite, and I've been banging on about this lens, and in my last X lineup lenses I spent a good deal of time talking about this lens. I've reviewed this lens, I've compared it with the 10-24, and this is also a great lens to purchase if you don't want to spend a lot of money. It's a brilliant wide angle lens, an excellent lens for astrophotography or night photography with its f2 aperture. This is a lens that I didn't want to get rid of when I bought the 10-24, simply because of the extra light it gathers versus the f4 10-24. And when I first purchased this, I was actually amazed at the quality of this lens and how sharp it was for like a £300 lens or £350, whatever I paid for it, until I compared it to the 10-24. I'll add a link in the video for that review. And it still is a fantastic lens, hence why I've still got it, and I won't sell it, because this is one of the most fun lenses I have used, along with the Mitacon. And if you are new to photography or new to the X system in general, or any system that you have, cracking lens to buy for a wide angle lens, and brilliant for landscapes, because if you're shooting at f8 and above, the sharpness corner to corner is really good, and manual focusing is no big deal with a mirrorless camera anyway. So great lens. That's a the Samyang 12mm, which gives you the equivalent of around 18mm in full frame terms. This is the 23mm f2 or 35mm in full frame terms. This is the graphite version. It came with the X Pro 2, and this is again an excellent piece of glass. It's a beautiful field of view. I prefer probably 35mm. It's one of my favorite focal lengths. I think it gives you it's a great storytelling lens. You can use it as a portrait lens and give you your portraits a little bit of distortion, or include some of the environment within that portrait. So it's like an environmental portrait lens, if you like. I had the 23mm f1.4 and I loved that lens, but I felt, and the 23mm 1.4 is a different type of lens. I wouldn't necessarily say it was better, but it was a great lens, obviously because the extra stop, the depth of field is slightly shallower, but at one stage I kept both of them for a long time, and then I just couldn't justify keeping the 1.4 version because I just wasn't using it enough to justify it. And I found the autofocus quite slow, being a first generation lens, and noisy. It did kind of whir quite a lot in when it was autofocusing. So this is also a weather resistant lens or weather sealed lens. It's got the gasket on the bottom like the 35mm, and this is a great piece of glass for the price. If you want a 35mm equivalent and you don't want to spend £600 or £700 on the 1.4 version, I don't think you're doing yourself an injustice by getting the f2 version. I think this is a brilliant lens and you can still create depth of field with it. However, it just isn't as good as a 1.4 in terms of depth of field. But again, I will add a link in this video where I compare both lenses, and that's the 23mm f2. 35mm f2. I purchased this lens and I used it for a little bit, and it's not a bad lens. In fact, it's an okay lens. The only thing I don't like about it is that focusing is definitely slower than 23mm. I don't care what anyone says, it is a slower lens than 23mm. Not a lot, but it is. The 23 is snappier. This sometimes gives you, in fact, if you're shooting in a backlit environment, this gives you like a strange green hue or haze. It just doesn't control flare in the background that great. I think when I reviewed it, I said it was okay, and it is okay, but I just don't feel this is the best of the cream of the crop of the new f2 range. I think you're really better off getting 23mm. If you fancy a 35mm, I would probably say go for the older generation 1.4. It will give you a slightly better depth of field, slower autofocus, but this one isn't really that fast. It's not a bad lens. For the moment, I'm keeping it in my kit. However, if Fuji decides to bring out a 35 1.4 Mark II with a better, quieter autofocus motor and faster, that'll be the first lens I probably will sell out. Yeah, I'm not that impressed with it, to be honest with you. I've been using it a lot, and it's just got to the stage now where I feel it's causing a lot of flaring. I've tried the other hood with it and it doesn't really make a big difference. It's okay, but I don't think I'd pay more than what the price is worth. You know, 300, 350 quid, I think that's top end. I feel a bit bad saying bad things about this lens. I'm not saying it's bad, I just don't think it's that great. So that's the 35mm f2. My advice would probably be get the 35 1.4. You can pick them up second hand for about 300 quid. So this is an older Jupiter 8 lens, which is an all manual focus lens. I mean, everything's manual on it. This is from an M39 Leica mount. It's got the M39 to FX adapter on it. I think you can see that there. And I just purchased this as a bit of fun. I think I paid about 80 or 90 quid for it. It is what it is. It's not sharp. It's a little bit hazy. It gives you quite a nice film look if that's what you're after. It's another good fun lens. Don't really use it that much. In fact, I've really used it only sort of like maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe 5 times at a push. And I'm keeping it though. I'm keeping it. For what I paid for it, I think it's a decent lens. Let's just put it that way. Finally, I have just swapped out the 16-55, which is currently recording this video. And the 16-55 is what I would call a workhorse of a lens. This is a lens that, again, if you are, let's say, doing this for a living and you're earning money from it and you want to upgrade from the kit lens, the 18-55, I believe, this is a worthy upgrade in terms of it's slightly sharper. Obviously you have the extra stop of light and it's consistent at f2.8. It doesn't go up the scale to f4 when you zoom in or out. It's also a weather sealed lens. It's quite beefy, it's quite heavy. I don't really take this out on what I would call any kind of street shooting or any kind of family trips. I think it's too bulky for that on the X-T2 or X Pro 2, and it purely is a work tool for me. However, there's no reason why you can't use it as a travel lens. It is a great lens. It's just heavy and bulky on the X-T2. Probably on the XH1 it will feel better because it's got a slightly bigger grip and it's a little bit chunkier, more DSLR-like if you like. And I cannot stipulate how important it is to have this sort of 16-55 focal length, which is the equivalent of like 24-80, let's say. This is your bread and butter kind of lens. It's the lens that you really must have. I don't have any downsides to this particular lens. Focusing is good, it's weather sealed, it's sharp, it manages flare really well, and this is one of my most used lenses in a professional environment. So that is it. That is my 10 lens lineup, starting from the 50-140, the 56mm, 10-24mm, 16-55mm, the Mitacon 35mm 0.95, the Samyang 12mm, 23mm f2, 35mm f2, Jupiter 8, and that's a 50mm, equivalent 75mm, and I've just put the 16mm on the X-T2 to record this segment, and that's the equivalent of a 24mm. That is my 2018 lens lineup. I'll be sticking to that lens lineup for a while until I decide that I want to do a slight change. Hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and catch me on the next one. Cheers.